So let's move on to talking about some of the different spray techniques out there. And, I don't know, there's probably 4, 5, 6 different ways that the guys can spray, from picture framing before to picture framing after to side by side to, using a fan tip. I've seen all kinds of different techniques over the years. Do you see that there's one way that's better than another?
There are certain times I would say picture framing beforehand can be better. And that's only based on the way that person would spray that cavity side to side by not wetting the edges of the studs with the liquid. But other than that, I honestly don't think any of those other ways, one's necessarily better. You can go side to side. You can go up and down. You could do circles, triangles, flat tip. It really boils down to what are you most comfortable with? And then if you're comfortable while doing it, you're probably going to be more efficient. So if you took a guy that's used to a mechanical purge gun and gave him a flat tip, he sprays with it enough, he becomes efficient at it. You throw him onto the most common gun, common mixing chamber that's around, that's in the industry, that slows him down. That's not where his comfort level is. And I think that's the biggest point right there is be comfortable. If you're not comfortable, you're not efficient.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just curious, what's your preference for what you like to spray?
I prefer round, but I can spray flat pattern, mechanical purge. I actually prefer the air purge fusion gun just because I think it's the easiest one to clean, to maintain. And I've used a lot of guns prior to that, but that's the one I go back to. I've got a couple of my own, and I don't even spray foam anymore.
Let's talk about like the job site in general. Are there certain things that when that applicator shows up at that job site, what are some of the most important things they need to consider on that job site?
Obviously safety, number one. Other than that, I would say get everybody cleared out while you're working. It makes it easier for you, less interruptions. And then when you can, if it's a cool building, heat it up if you can, or at least try to warm that substrate up to help with your yield.
Where's the temperature point where they need to start looking at that? How cold does the building need to be before they start?
I would say probably 50 degrees, 55 degrees. Anything below that, it's certainly going to start to hurt yield. Obviously, the hotter it is, the better. I just did a job July 4th. And we had a substrate temperature of 140 degrees while we were spraying the 104. And I couldn't believe how much jump we were getting and how much yield we were getting out of that. But it was because that substrate was 140 degrees.
What are some of the different ways an applicator can train to be better? Watch guys spraying on a job site. YouTube could be a decent way to learn, although you do see a lot of bad habits on YouTube. Other than that, I'd say just keep practicing. Find a style, spray with it for a week or two, and then change up, try something else, see what that does for you. But you can't replace gun time. There's nothing better than time behind that gun to learn the craft. Okay. Are there a couple things like, how do you know if you're getting better or worse or not making any improvements as an applicator? Is it really like understanding what the maximum yield of the product is versus what you can install it? So if there's, let's say the maximum yield on a product you measure on a job site where you're measuring the waste and everything else is, let's say 25,000 board feet. And then you were able to install, let's say 22,000 on that day is at the end of the day, you measure it versus what the takeoff is, and 22 versus 25, and that 3,000 gap, that's my measure of how good I am, and my job is to try to close that gap on every single job I do so I can get closer to what is the maximum capability of that product. Is that a good way of starting to have an understanding of how good you are as a sprayer?
Yeah, absolutely. But when you're trying to figure out what your true yields were, when you're doing your measurements, be extremely accurate with your measurements on the depth of the foam. And then beyond that, it's don't be satisfied with 22, shoot for 22.5. And then don't be satisfied with that, shoot for 23. Just keep trying.
So it's important as an applicator to understand what's the maximum capability of that product and not just, hey, what did I use at the end of the day on that job site, right? You need to know both numbers.
You do.
Yeah, otherwise, you don't know how, if you're getting better or not. How good am I? I got 21,000 board feet on a job. Well, that's great. Well, is it really? Well, what's the maximum capability of foam? Is the maximum capability 21.5 or is the maximum capability 25,000? And so how good are you? You got to really know what the capabilities of that foam is. What about yeah, go ahead.
The other one is look at how much waste you've generated too. If you see that, you're filling up a 40-yard dumpster on a 1,200 square foot house, you're not doing something right. You need to speed up a little bit, or once again, lower that mixing chamber size.
Yeah, I've heard of guys like counting bags of trash per set of foam that they do too as a way of measuring. Have you heard of stuff like that as well?
Yeah, I'm not so sure how accurate that really is. There's times that it's darn near impossible to get just 3/4 to an inch of open cell in a cavity, but we just had one a couple weeks ago where we were trying to shoot a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch to seal an attic off from any dust or dirt entering the building from there. And there was no way to effectively measure what our true yield was on that job because you couldn't spray it 1/2 inch thick everywhere.
Yeah, some of those things, I guess, just becomes one of those impossibilities that you just have to, hey, what's our best guess of how well we did on that job? What about looking at like time to install a set of foam, or could it be a measure of how many board feet per hour I can install? Is that another way of measuring of how good I am as an applicator?
No, not at all. I don't believe that at all. Every house is different. Probably, 15 years ago, I actually did 11 sets of open cell in one day. I have never even come close again. No, 11 sets. It's 11 sets. It was the perfect job. There were no interior walls. It was a flat roof deck, and it was just lay down on a board on a lift, have a driver drive me, and all I did was move my wrist left to right 4 feet, fill up in between the scissor trusses, and move on to the next section there. And it was the perfect setup. I will never see another job that easy again. I've seen some jobs where literally 1/4 of a set of open cell will take you all day to get it done based on either the layout of the house, how much clearance do you have? Are you on your back, on your gut? I just don't think that measuring how many sets per day or how many pounds per day definitely makes you any better than someone who does less.